Colonel Evelyn Harlan, a 76-year-old widow whose gentle hands had once rocked 3 children and later wiped away their adult tears, lived alone in the grand yet fading Victorian house on Maple Street that still carried the faint scent of lavender sachets and Sunday roasts. Its creaking oak floors and floral wallpaper bearing witness to decades of quiet sacrifice after her husband, Colonel Edward Harlan, died of a heart attack 15 years earlier. She had given everything to her children: Richard, the 48-year-old real estate developer who constantly chased failing deals; Laura, the 45-year-old accountant whose sharp tongue hid gambling debts; and Daniel, the 41-year-old drifter who drifted between jobs and girlfriends, paying their mortgages in secret, funding their children's private schools, cooking meals during their crises, and never once complaining about the arthritis that twisted her fingers or the loneliness that settled in her chest like winter fog. On the evening of her 76th birthday, the family gathered in the formal dining room beneath the crystal chandelier Edward had proudly installed, the long mahogany table set with her best china and a roast she had labored over despite the pain in her back, the grandchildren running through the halls while the adults sipped wine and offered perfunctory compliments. After dessert, Richard stood with a theatrical grin and announced they had a very special gift for Mom this year, wheeling forward the ornate high-backed chair that had always sat at the head of the table, now draped in black crepe paper with a gilded wooden sign nailed across the backrest reading, "Reserved for the burden." Laughter erupted as Richard read the accompanying card aloud in mock solemnity. "Happy birthday, Mom. May this chair remind you that some weights are better left empty so the rest of us can finally breathe. Love, your grateful family who needs space." Laura giggled behind manicured fingers, Daniel recorded the moment on his phone for social media, and even the grandchildren joined the cruel chorus because the adults were laughing so hard. Evelyn's lined face drained of color, her trembling hand touching the cold wood as the room spun around her. For one terrible heartbeat, silence fell except for the ticking grandfather clock before the laughter resumed louder than before. She whispered, "I see," with the last remnants of dignity, rose slowly from the table, and walked upstairs to her bedroom without another word, the echoes of their mockery following her like hungry shadows up the creaking staircase. That night, alone in the 4-poster bed where she had once fallen asleep beside Edward listening to his stories of military life, Evelyn clutched his faded photograph to her chest, her heart finally surrendering in the quiet hours before dawn, slipping away peacefully with a single tear drying on her wrinkled cheek as the old house seemed to sigh around her, its walls settling as though releasing a long-held breath. The funeral was efficient and sparsely attended, the children already calculating the value of the property while dividing jewelry and silverware with clinical detachment. 3 weeks later, Richard, Laura, and Daniel moved their families into the Victorian house with plans to renovate and flip it for a handsome profit, boxing up Evelyn's clothes and photographs with minimal sentiment and stacking them in the attic. The empty chair remained exactly where they had left it in the dining room, its black crepe long discarded, but the gilded sign still nailed firmly in place like a permanent accusation. At first, the disturbances were subtle and easy to dismiss. A faint creaking from the chair at midnight as though an invisible weight had settled into it, the sudden scent of lavender and rosewater drifting through the hallway, the soft rustle of fabric that sounded exactly like Evelyn's favorite floral house dress. Richard laughed it off as old house settling while pouring himself whiskey in the wood-paneled study that had once been his father's sanctuary. But on the 7th night, during their first formal family dinner in the house, the chair suddenly scraped backward across the hardwood floor with a groan that vibrated through everyone's bones, and an invisible yet crushing weight pressed down upon it so heavily that the floorboards beneath bowed visibly, the chandelier swaying overhead. Plates rattled, a crystal wine glass tipped and spilled deep red liquid across the white tablecloth, forming the perfect shape of a broken heart. Laura forced a nervous laugh and called it a draft, but 10-year-old Emily, Richard's daughter, pointed at the empty seat and whispered, "Grandma is sitting there now." She looked sad and very tired. From that moment forward, the chair was never truly empty again. At every subsequent meal, an unseen presence occupied it. Silverware lifted and moved on its own, portions of food disappeared from the plates closest to the chair, and soft whispers began drifting through the room, Evelyn's familiar voice reciting the lullabies she had once sung to each of them as children, now laced with quiet, heartbroken accusation. "You were my burden once, my darlings, now I am yours." The horror deepened with patient maternal cruelty. Richard attempted to remove the chair on the 10th night, gripping its carved arms with all his considerable strength, only to feel a sudden wave of age crash through his body, deep wrinkles blooming around his eyes, hair graying rapidly at the temples, sharp arthritis exploding in his back and knees where none had existed moments before. He released the chair with a guttural scream and collapsed, suddenly appearing closer to 60 than 48. Laura, practical as always, hired professional movers the following day, but the burly men refused to enter the dining room after one of them touched the chair and immediately suffered a massive stroke, collapsing onto the floor while muttering about an old woman in a floral dress staring at him with infinite sorrow. Daniel, desperate and drunk, tried burning the chair in the backyard fire pit at midnight, dousing the wood in gasoline and striking match after match, yet the flames refused to catch. Instead, the wood grew warm to the touch and began emitting Evelyn's recorded birthday laughter from that fateful night, twisted now into something mocking and eternal that echoed across the neighborhood. The family began aging in painful, uneven increments whenever they defied the chair. Laura's once elegant hands gnarled overnight into twisted claws, her sharp mind slowing as cherished memories of her mother's sacrifices faded and were replaced by nightmares of Evelyn cooking alone at 2 a.m. while they partied. Daniel's hair fell out in clumps as his reflection showed him as a frail old man, begging on his knees for forgiveness he would never earn. The grandchildren suffered most cruelly. Little Emily began speaking exclusively in Evelyn's soft, patient voice, reciting decades-old recipes and bedtime stories, while her younger brother developed a permanent stoop and whispered that Grandma wanted them all to sit down and talk properly for once. By the third week, the whispers had evolved into full conversations at exactly 3:33 a.m. every night, the chair creaking rhythmically as Evelyn's voice detailed every overlooked birthday, every canceled visit, every quiet dollar she had slipped into their accounts from her meager widow's pension, while they mocked her frugality behind her back. Darker secrets spilled from the very walls: Richard's extramarital affair that had nearly destroyed his marriage, Laura's hidden gambling debts that had drained their savings, Daniel's theft from Evelyn's account years earlier, all laid bare in his mother's gentle, heartbroken tone that somehow hurt worse than any shout. The house itself began to physically transform. Floral wallpaper peeled away in long strips to reveal old family photographs printed directly onto the plaster, each image showing Evelyn sitting alone at the dining table while her children laughed elsewhere. Floorboards softened into warm, flesh-like texture that pulsed with a slow, maternal heartbeat. Every mirror in the house reflected not the living family but Evelyn calmly seated in the chair, watching them with patient, infinite sorrow that never blinked. Panic consumed the household completely by the end of the first month. Richard boarded up the dining room door with heavy planks and nails only to wake the next morning and find the boards removed, the chair now positioned at the head of every bed in the house during the night, its presence pressing down on their chests until they gasped awake. Laura tried desperately to sell the property at any price, but every potential buyer fled after sitting briefly at the dining table, claiming an old woman in a lavender-scented dress had leaned close and whispered their darkest financial secrets and hidden shames. The family began to starve because no food could be eaten without the chair's invisible occupant stealing portions and replacing them with handfuls of cold ashes that tasted of lavender and regret. Daniel was the first to break completely. He dragged his weakened body to the chair at dawn, collapsed into it with tears streaming down his face, and confessed everything in a broken voice. How he had resented her endless help, how he had called her a burden in private conversations, how he had secretly wished she would die sooner so they could inherit the house and finally be free. As the words left his lips, the invisible weight lifted slightly. Patches of hair regrew, color returned to his cheeks, but the chair demanded more. One by one, the others were forced to follow. Laura sat next, sobbing through admissions of financial exploitation and emotional cruelty, her gnarled hands smoothing painfully back into youthful suppleness inch by inch. Richard resisted the longest, barricading himself in the study with bottles of whiskey until the whispers followed him there, recounting in Evelyn's voice the exact moment he had nailed the gilded sign to her birthday chair while she watched with shattered eyes. When he finally crawled to the seat and confessed his deepest shame, the wave of relief he had felt when the doctor called about her heart attack, the entire house sighed audibly, lights flickering as decades of accumulated resentment bled from the walls like black ink dissolving in water. The grandchildren were guided last by unseen gentle hands to sit in the chair and promise, through choking tears, to remember their grandmother with genuine love rather than convenience. As the final confession echoed through the dining room, the chair finally emptied. The gilded sign crumbled into harmless dust, and for one beautiful, fleeting moment, the house smelled only of fresh lavender, roast beef, and warm apple pie. Then the true nature of Evelyn's haunting revealed itself. She had never sought revenge, only the company she had been denied in life. The chair remained permanently at the head of the table, now occupied not by a mere ghost, but by an absence so profound and loving that anyone who sat in it began to vanish slowly, pulled into the warm, endless embrace of a mother's starved affection. Richard was the first to disappear mid-sentence at dinner one evening, his body fading into the polished wood while wearing a peaceful smile he had not shown since childhood. Laura followed days later, then Daniel, then the grandchildren one by one, their laughter and voices joining Evelyn's soft lullabies inside the walls. The Victorian house now stands silent and beautifully restored on Maple Street, its lights glowing warmly in the dining room every evening as an invisible family gathers around the table where the empty chair is never truly empty again. New buyers arrive every few years, drawn by real estate listings praising the charming period home with original features, only to find a single high-backed chair at the head of the dining table bearing a fresh gilded sign. Reserved for the family, and somewhere deep within the walls, Evelyn's patient, loving voice begins to sing lullabies once more, waiting eternally for the next burdened souls to come home and finally sit down for dinner.